Well, you had a different kind of a president before me. They didn't mind being ripped off. They didn't mind being robbed. They didn't mind drugs pouring into our country. They didn't mind the jails of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago being emptied into the U.S., where they take over Colorado and other places. I do mind. So you had a different kind of a president. I hope people are enjoying it because we've never been respected more than...
So there he stands again, swaggering through another performance piece that would be almost comical if it weren't so catastrophically destructive. And you just watched Donald Trump declare that Venezuela emptied its prisons and sent their criminals streaming across our borders to terrorize American cities, while Biden and his predecessors simply smiled and waved them through because they didn't mind being robbed. And here's the thing that should make your blood absolutely boil, because we need to talk about what you actually just witnessed in that clip. Because this isn't about immigration policy disagreements or even substantive debates over border security. This is something far more sinister and historically grotesque. This is the deployment of classic fascist propaganda techniques refined over a century of authoritarian movements, and you're watching it happen in real time on your screen. And I need you to understand the sheer magnitude of the lie you just heard, because experts in and out of Venezuela have confirmed there is no evidence to back up Trump's claim that Venezuela is emptying its prisons to send criminals to the United States. And this isn't ambiguous. This isn't a matter of interpretation or competing narratives. Trump has never corroborated this claim, and experts have told CNN, PolitiFact and FactCheck.org that they know of no evidence for it, and we're talking about multiple independent fact-checking organizations, criminologists who actually study Venezuela, researchers who monitor global prison populations, all saying the same thing, which is that this is a fabrication, a complete invention, and when I say invention, I mean Helen Fair, co-author of the Prison Population List and research fellow at the Institute for Crime and Justice Policy Research at Birkbeck, University of London, does a daily news search to see what's going on in prisons around the world, and has seen absolutely no evidence that any country is emptying its prisons and sending them all to the U.S. But Trump doesn't care about evidence because evidence is irrelevant to the fascist project. And wait, because it gets worse, so much worse. Because when you examine where Venezuela's crime reduction actually comes from, the reality is devastating in its own right, because criminologists told PolitiFact violent deaths have dropped because of Venezuela's poor economy and the government's extrajudicial killings, and so many people have left Venezuela that criminals have fewer people to assault, which means Trump is taking the human tragedy of economic collapse, the state violence, and mass migration and weaponizing it into xenophobic propaganda that transforms desperate refugees fleeing authoritarianism into an invading criminal army. And the historical echoes here should terrify you, because this is exactly, and I mean exactly, the playbook that fascism uses to dehumanize segments of the population, trying to reduce empathy and justify inhumane treatment of them. And when Trump talks about Colorado being taken over, he's deploying what scholars of authoritarianism recognize as the creation of what fascist politics calls unreality, to cast reality into doubt, and break down reality to remove the ability to assess arguments by a common standard, because the actual facts about Aurora are so different from Trump's fever dream that it's almost obscene. Let me break down what actually happened in Aurora, Colorado, because this is important. And Aurora's Republican Mayor Mike Kaufman said concerns about gang activity have been grossly exaggerated, and the incidents were limited to several apartment complexes in this city of more than 400,000 residents. And the Aurora Police Department, working with federal and local officials, identified 10 people linked to the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, and 8 of those people had been arrested as of September. So we're talking about 10 individuals, 10 in a city of 400,000 people, and Trump has transformed this into a narrative of total conquest, of cities overrun, of an entire state under siege. And it was Aurora City Council member Danielle Jurinsky, whose false claims of a complete gang takeover of the city by the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua were instrumental in drawing the attention of right-leaning national media outlets. And then the whole grotesque machinery of right-wing media amplification kicked into gear, transforming isolated incidents at properties owned by a slumlord with code violations into proof of Biden's civilizational surrender. And you need to understand that Trump's claims about Aurora can be traced to allegations made by the landlord of several apartment buildings, and the company claims that Venezuelan gang members have taken over its buildings, trying to kick out apartment managers and extort rent payments. And the apartments owned by CBZ management are home to hundreds of people, including many new immigrants who were placed there by local nonprofits. So what we actually have is a story about housing exploitation and negligent property management being transmuted through the alchemy of fascist propaganda into an invasion narrative, and then Trump has the audacity, the absolute gall, to claim that America has never been respected more than we are now, and I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the international polling data absolutely eviscerates this claim. Under the Trump administration, international approval of U.S. leadership fell to a historic low, with confidence in President Donald Trump roughly on par with confidence in Chinese President Xi Jinping, and when Biden took office, a median of 75% of respondents in 12 countries expressed confidence in Biden compared with 17% for Trump the previous year, and we're talking about America's closest allies, countries that have stood with us through decades of partnership, and they looked at Trump and saw danger, saw incompetence, saw a man who was described as dangerous by majorities in each country surveyed in 2017, while no more than 21% held this view of Biden, and Trump destroyed our relationships with NATO allies, abandoned international institutions, weaponized tariffs against our friends, and now stands before rallies claiming unprecedented respect, while across 34 nations polled a median of 43% have confidence in Biden to do the right thing regarding world affairs, while just 28% have confidence in Trump. And these aren't progressive think tanks or liberal advocacy groups conducting this research. This is Pew Research Center. This is Gallup. These are the most respected polling organizations in the world. But here's what's truly chilling, and what should keep you awake at night worrying about the direction of this country, because what you're witnessing is the fundamental architecture of fascist politics as described by scholars who have spent their entire careers studying how democracies die. Fascist politics includes rhetoric that encourages fear and anger as a means to foment ethnic and religious division, with the goal being to target ideological enemies and remove restraints in combating them. And Trump isn't making a policy argument about border security that we can debate with evidence and competing values. He's constructing what historians recognize as the classic fascist enemy, the dehumanized other who threatens civilization itself. And he's doing it with techniques that savvy authoritarians use to dehumanize their enemies, to get people to lose their aversion to violence, which is exactly what Trump is doing, just as Hitler used this ploy from the very start, calling Jews the black parasites of the nation, in a 1920 speech. And I'm not being hyperbolic or engaging in cheap comparisons when I invoke that history, because the pattern is unmistakable and extensively documented. Think about what Trump is actually asserting in that clip, because he's not just lying about immigration statistics or exaggerating security concerns. He's constructing an entire alternate reality where previous presidents didn't mind their own country being destroyed, where they sat passively as foreign nations weaponized their criminal populations against American cities, where the entire establishment was complicit in national suicide, and only he, only Trump, possesses both the strength and the will to save us. And this narrative structure is textbook authoritarianism, because nationalism is at the core of fascism, and the fascist leader employs a sense of collective victimhood to create a sense of group identity, and he's positioning himself as the singular strongman who can protect the real Americans from the manufactured threat, and the Republican Party has become completely captured by this authoritarian logic, to the point where Senator J.D. Vance stood by Trump's false claims that Venezuelan gangs have invaded and conquered Aurora, Colorado, even after the Republican mayor of Aurora himself called the claims grossly exaggerated. And when we talk about Biden's actual Venezuela policy, because context matters, and facts still matter even when they're systematically ignored by the right-wing propaganda machine, Venezuelan migrants were first granted temporary protected status in 2021 by the Biden administration, which cited the deteriorating economic and political conditions in Venezuela under the authoritarian rule of President Nicolas Maduro, and nearly 8 million people have left Venezuela as part of the largest exodus recorded in the Western Hemisphere, according to the United Nations. So Biden wasn't letting criminals in. He was responding to a massive humanitarian crisis created by an authoritarian socialist regime that destroyed Venezuela's economy and drove millions into desperate migration. From September to November 2022, the number of times Border Patrol stopped Venezuelans trying to enter the U.S. illegally at the southern border dropped from about 1,100 a day to 230 a day, following a new parole program that allows eligible Venezuelan immigrants to enter the U.S. legally for 2 years, and Border Patrol's use of a public health policy to quickly turn away Venezuelans who are not eligible for the parole program, which means Biden actually created policy mechanisms that reduced unauthorized border crossings while providing legal pathways for legitimate asylum seekers. But that nuanced reality can't penetrate the fascist narrative structure that requires immigrants to be simultaneously criminal masterminds, taking over cities and also welfare leeches, stealing resources. The propaganda technique here is so transparent once you learn to recognize it, because regular and repeated obvious lying is part of the process by which fascist politics destroys the information space, and a common tactic is the use of conspiracy theories, which work to denigrate, delegitimize, impugn and malign their targets to raise suspicion about credibility and decencies. And Trump has told some version of this lie about countries emptying prisons hundreds of times across years of rallies and interviews, and it doesn't matter how many times fact-checkers debunk it, or how many experts refute it, because the repetition itself is the point. The goal is to create an alternate epistemic universe, where his supporters simply reject any information that contradicts the narrative, and we've reached the point where the claim about emptied prisons stems from an article on the conservative site Breitbart that quoted an anonymous government source, and the Department of Homeland Security has no reports showing that this is the case. So we have a claim sourced to an anonymous quote in a partisan outlet, contradicted by the actual government agency responsible for border security. And yet the lie persists, and metastasizes, and becomes conservative conventional wisdom, and I need you to understand the current stakes because right now, in December 2025, as I'm speaking to you, more than 1.6 million immigrants have lost their legal status in the first 11 months of President Trump's presidency, including people who applied for and were accepted to come to the country on a wide variety of immigration parole, visa, asylum, and temporary protected status programs, and that number exceeds Philadelphia's entire population. And this is the largest effort to take away deportation protections for migrants who are in the country legally. So Trump's rhetoric about criminal invasions has translated into the systematic destruction of legal immigration pathways affecting over 1.5 million human beings who followed the rules, who were granted legal status, who built lives and families and communities, and are now being stripped of their protections as part of what can only be described as ethnic cleansing through bureaucratic mechanism. And Julia Galat, the Associate Director of the U.S. Migration Policy Program at the Migration Policy Institute, said, "I don't think we've ever as a country seen such a huge number of people losing their immigration status all at once, and this is historically unprecedented in American immigration policy." But Trump keeps lying, keeps fabricating, keeps constructing his fascist mythology, because lying about Venezuela or Congo or any other country serves the deeper purpose of maintaining the state of emergency, the sense of existential threat that justifies authoritarian measures. And when Trump claimed that a huge number of migrants are coming out of jails in the Congo, both the Democratic Republic of Congo and the neighboring Republic of Congo told CNN that it is false, and experts on both countries also told CNN they had not seen any evidence of Congolese prisons being emptied, let alone evidence of either country somehow having brought ex-prisoners into the U.S. as Trump claimed. So he's not just lying about Venezuela, he's constructed an entire global conspiracy theory where dozens of countries across multiple continents are somehow coordinating to weaponize their criminal populations against America. The recorded global prison population increased from October 2021 to April 2024, from at least about 10.77 million people to at least about 10.99 million people, which means the aggregate data shows prison populations are rising globally, not falling, but Trump claims entire prison systems are being emptied into America. And when Trump says Biden and previous presidents didn't mind being robbed and didn't mind drugs pouring into our country, he's engaging in what authoritarian scholars recognize as the delegitimization of all previous democratic governance, because if every administration before Trump was fundamentally illegitimate or traitorous or complicit in national destruction, then democratic norms and constitutional constraints become obstacles to overcome rather than principles to uphold, and this is how democracies collapse from within. Because fascist politicians typically come to power through a democratic election, but after being elected, the new leader rules society absolutely demanding loyalty to him and to his ethnic identity, and this authoritarian leader speaks on behalf of the country and aims to separate society into us versus them, and we watched this exact dynamic play out during Trump's first term when he demanded personal loyalty from FBI directors and intelligence officials and military leaders, when he purged anyone who wouldn't swear fealty to him personally, rather than to the Constitution. The Colorado claims are particularly revealing because they show how the fascist propaganda machine operates at scale, taking a local housing dispute at properties owned by a slumlord and transforming it through right-wing media amplification into evidence of civilizational collapse. Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman told Denver 7, "There's no question there have been some issues, but it's been so dramatically exaggerated that it's the entire city being overrun by criminal or gang activity. Despite documented crime activity by members of Tren de Aragua, In Aurora, police tell Denver 7 that crime is down 17% year over year across 7 major crime categories, so crime is actually declining in Aurora, but Trump needs it to be a war zone, needs it to be taken over, needs it to be proof that immigrant communities are inherently dangerous and ungovernable, because that justification is essential for the mass deportations and family separations and civil rights violations that are already underway. What we're watching is the construction of genocide logic, and I don't use that term lightly, because the dehumanization of entire populations, the systematic lying about their criminality and their threat to civilization, the creation of emergency conditions that justify extraordinary measures, these are the prerequisites for ethnic cleansing and political violence, and we have extensive historical documentation of how this process unfolds, and Trump went to New Hampshire and delivered a speech that included a pledge to root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, and to that end he conjures existential threats to the nation from non-white immigrants and an expanding cast of internal enemies, and the use of the word vermin should set off every alarm bell because that's the language of extermination. That's how you linguistically prepare a population to accept violence against the dehumanized other. So when Trump stands there and claims unprecedented respect while lying about Venezuela and demonizing immigrants and positioning himself as the only leader strong enough to save America from the manufactured crisis he's describing, you're not watching normal politics, you're not watching partisan exaggeration or campaign rhetoric, you're watching the active deployment of fascist propaganda techniques that have been studied and documented and historically associated with the collapse of democratic systems and the rise of authoritarian regimes, and the fact that he's doing this in December 2025, after already having been elected to a second term, should terrify you because he's not moderating, he's not governing from the center, he's accelerating the authoritarian program and using the power of the presidency to make his lies into policy reality, and I need everyone watching this to understand that when Trump signed an executive order, slashing a program created by the Biden administration to temporarily allow the entrance of 530,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, he was implementing the logical extension of the propaganda you just watched in that clip. He's turning the fascist mythology into administrative action, and the human cost is staggering, and still largely invisible to those of us insulated from the immigration system. And the final piece of this that I need you to grasp is that the Venezuela lie isn't an isolated falsehood. It's part of a comprehensive assault on truth itself, because unreality is an important fascist goal to cast reality into doubt, so that what is true cannot be agreed upon in reasoned debate, is replaced by fear and anger. And when you can't agree on basic facts about whether prisons are being emptied, or whether crime is rising or falling, or whether America is respected or despised internationally, then democracy becomes impossible, because democracy requires a shared factual foundation on which to build competing visions and policy arguments, and Trump and the Republican Party have systematically destroyed that foundation, replacing it with conspiratorial thinking and tribalist epistemology, where truth is determined by partisan loyalty rather than evidence, and the mainstream media remains largely unable or unwilling to call this what it is, which is fascist propaganda straight out of the 20th century playbook, adapted for the 21st century media environment and weaponized against American democracy itself. And we're running out of time to recognize the threat and organize the resistance that our moment demands, because once authoritarian consolidation reaches a certain point, the tools of democratic accountability become ineffective, and we'll be left with only the options of submission or much more dangerous forms of resistance. And I'm telling you right now, that clip you just watched isn't funny, isn't mere political theater, isn't Trump being Trump. It's a crystallized example of how fascism works, how it spreads, how it prepares populations for atrocities by first dehumanizing the targets, and then systematically destroying the information space that might allow for reality-based resistance, and the fact that he's wrapping it in the language of strength and respect and protecting America only makes it more dangerous, because authoritarian movements always position themselves as defenders of the nation, even as they hollow out its democratic institutions, and if we don't name what we're seeing, if we don't call out the fascist rhetoric, and the authoritarian ambitions, and the systematic assault on truth and human dignity, then we're complicit in the democratic collapse that's unfolding before our eyes, and history will judge us not for our intentions, but for our failure to recognize the danger and fight back with everything we have.